Hello everyone and welcome to Beginner's Code. Today we are going to learn how we can create a password generator that is dependent on user input via a form using AJAX. Okay, so I have created a folder called password generator and I've changed my working directory into the folder and also added it into Visual Studio Code. So first we want to create a virtual environment, say Python 3-m venv and then myenv. Once that's done, we will just activate it. So we'll say source myenv bin activate. And now that we have this active, we can first install Flask. And Flask will be the framework that we're using to interact with HTTP requests. So inside of our folder, we now have our virtual environment. Alongside that, I'm going to create a templates folder and a static folder. And then just in the root directory, I'll create an app.py file. So now if we come back to here, double check that everything is installed. So that's perfect. Now we will start by importing Flask. So from Flask, import Flask, render template, request, and JSONify. Now we will just create an instance of app, so app flask __ name, and then we'll say if name is double equal to main app.run, and we will say debug is equal to true. Now, just to make sure that everything's set up before we actually get into our actual logic, we'll say app.root, and we'll pass a // and we'll just say def index, and then here we will just return render template of index.html. Now in the templates folder, we will create an index.html file, and inside this we'll just create a hello world inside of a heading 1 tag. Now if we come back to here and we say Python 3 app.py, we now get a local development server, and if we copy this and head over to Google Chrome and paste, we get our hello world printed out. So now that we know that everything is set up, we can delete that and then come back to our app.py. So the first thing that we should probably do is create a way for us to actually interact with the front end to choose what you want in your password. So if we come over to the index.html, just create a HTML5 boilerplate, and we will say password generator. And we're also going to link here to the styles.css. So we'll say URL4, then we'll say static and file name styles.css. So now if we come to our static and we create a styles.css folder, we'll just make heading 1 and we will change the color to red. And then down here, we will say password generator. Now if we come back to Google Chrome and we refresh, we have this now in red. So our static file or our styles.css file is all linked up, which is good. So now underneath the password generator, we need a form that will essentially cover things like the length of the password, whether or not you want to include uppercase and lowercase digits and special characters. So we'll create a form and we'll say ID of password form. We'll remove the action because we're going to actually use AJAX to handle the form submission. So inside of this, we'll say div form group, and then we'll say label for length, and then we'll just have password length, and we'll have an input type of number. Then we'll have a name of length and an ID of length, and then we'll just give it a default value of 12. And then we'll make a min of 4 and a max of, say, 32. We'll maybe make it 28 because you don't want a password too long. And then we will say required because then it means that people have to put in a length. Even if they want it as 12, it's required. Next, we will use a div and we'll say form group, and we'll also give it a checkbox label. So the label will be for uppercase, and then we'll say include uppercase letters. And above this, because we're going to use flex to make it all in line, we will give it a type of checkbox. So this is an input checkbox with an ID of uppercase and a name of uppercase. And then we're going to essentially do the same again, but for lowercase. So I will copy this and change this to lowercase, change the name to lowercase, and then label for lowercase and include lowercase letters. Next, we will do the same again. So I'll paste this and I'll change this to be digits, change the name to also be digits, the label for to be digits because this then corresponds with this, and then include digits. And now we will do the same but for special characters. So I'll paste this again and then change these to the special underscore chars, so special characters, label for special chars, and then include special characters. And now we want to be able to essentially avoid ambiguous characters. So when things are written in lowercase and uppercase, sometimes letters and numbers can look the same. So for instance, L, I and 1 can look the same, and 0 and O can also look the same. So we want a way for people to be able to avoid that happening, because it can obviously get quite confusing. So we'll create another div, and this will also have checkbox label, and we'll say input type checkbox, and then the ID will be avoid ambiguous, and the name will also be avoid ambiguous, and then the label for avoid ambiguous, and we'll say avoid ambiguous characters, and then next to that we'll just say 0, capital O, lowercase l, capital I, and 1, just to give people an understanding of what we mean by ambiguous characters. And then just at the bottom of the form we will create a button, and this type will be a submit button. So we'll say generate password. So now that we have our form set up, if we come over to Google Chrome and refresh, we now have a form with no styling, but it is a checkbox, and we can generate the password. It will pass through a query string because that's how the form works. But now we want to add a little bit of styling. So if we come back over to to Visual Studio Code, and we can start by adjusting the body. So we'll say everything will have a font family of Arial and sans serif. We'll say background color, and we'll give it a value of F0, F2, F5. We'll say the color should be a grey, so 333. Give everything flex, and then justify content to the center and align items to the center, and this will centralize everything. We'll say flex direction of column, and then a height of 100 VH, so this will make sure that everything is the same height as the browser. and margin of 0. So if I refresh now, everything's in the middle, and I can move this around, and this will be the same height. It will always be 100 of the viewport height. So now back to Visual Studio Code, we'll say heading 1, and we'll give it a color change of 4C8F50. Now the form, we will say background color of white, padding 20 pixels, border radius of 8 pixels just to give it a nice little curve, and then we'll say box shadow of 0, 4 pixels, 8 pixels, and then we'll say RGBA 0, 0, 0, and we'll say 0.1 just to give it a little bit of opacity, and then max width of 400 pixels, and we'll make sure that it fits 100% of that 400 pixels, and then margin bottom of 20 pixels. So now if we come back to Google and we refresh, we now have a bit more of a solid form. So now we need to make each form group a little bit nicer. So we'll say form group, and we'll just give it a margin bottom of 1 rem just to space it out a little bit more. And then we'll say the label needs to be inline block, and font weight of bold. And then we will use the input type number. So each number will be a width of, and then we'll do a calculation of 100% minus 20 pixels. And then we'll say padding of 8 pixels, margin bottom of 20 pixels, border of 1 pixel solid CCC, so another lighter grey, and then a radius of 4 pixels. So now if we come back to here and we refresh, we now have a better looking number. Come back to Visual Studio Code and we will now do the checkboxes. So we'll say input type checkbox, and we'll say margin right of 10 pixels and vertical line middle, and then we'll say checkbox label. So this is each div other than the password length. We'll say display flex, and then align items center. And this will put the checkbox and the text in the center of each div, just to make it look a little bit nicer that way. Now we will do the button. So we'll say button, background of 4C8F50, so that green that we used earlier, color of white for the font text, border none, padding 10 pixels to the top and the bottom and 20 pixels to the right and left, text align of center, don't know how that happened, and then we will say display inline block, font size of 16 pixels, border radius of 4 pixels. We'll give the cursor a pointer, and then we're just going to give a transition of background color, and we'll say 0.3 seconds, because now if we say button hover, we can actually change the background color to be a little bit of a darker green, so 45A049. And then if we come back to Google, and when we hover over, we have a nice little transition. Okay, so now we have pretty much styled everything. There will be a little bit more when we actually add our results back in. But for now, we need to actually have a way to generate a password, and this will head us back over to our app.py. So now we need to actually create a function that will use or generate a random string of characters based on what the user has inputted. So we'll create a function, we'll just say def generate password. Now here we're going to pass in whether or not they have used or ticked certain things in the form. So first we will say length, then we'll say use uppercase, then use lowercase, use digits, use special chars, and then avoid ambiguous. So now we're going to just create an empty string, and we'll say characters is equal to an empty string. And we'll say if use uppercase, then we're going to set characters plus equal to, and now we want to use a library called string, and this will just create a random or use a random thing from the string library. So we'll say import random and import string, and then here we're just going to say string.ascii uppercase, so that will actually just create a random letter from A to Z in uppercase. Then we'll say if use lowercase, and we'll say characters plus equal string.ascii lowercase. If use digits, and we'll say characters plus equal string.digits. If use special chars, then we'll say characters plus equals string.punctuation. And then if avoid ambiguous, we're going to say ambiguous chars is equal to, and then we'll say lowercase l, capital I, 1, O, or capital O, and 0. And then we'll say characters equals string dot join, and we'll say C for C in characters. So we'll loop through the characters, and then we will say if C is not in ambiguous chars, then we will be joining C to this. So now we have our logic to actually create or handle the different characters that we're using, whether it's uppercase or lowercase, etc. So now we'll say if not characters. So this means that if characters is empty, we will return error, no character sets selected. And then outside of this, we will just return an empty string, and we'll say dot join, and then random dot choice, and we'll pass in characters. And then outside of this, we'll say for underscore in range of length. So now this is going to pass in the characters that we've got here into random.choice, and we'll loop through it the amount of length that we need. So if they've set 12, then it will do it 12 times, and it will output it into a string, which is all joined together. So now we have this, we then need to adjust our app.root, because this needs to handle both post and get methods. So we'll say get and also post. And now we need a way to actually call this function up here. So we'll create a new root. We'll say app.root, and we will just call it generate. And we will then say methods, and this is only going to be a post method. So we can now create a function called generate password root. And we'll say length is equal to integer, so this will make sure that whatever's passed in is an integer. We'll say request.form.get, then we'll say the length, input with the name of length, so this is going to get this, and we'll just pass in 12 as a default number. So we'll say use uppercase, and we'll say uppercase in request.form. So if uppercase is in request.form, then that will just turn it into a true. We'll say use lowercase in request.form. Again, that will just turn this into true. Use digits in request.form. Use special chars, and then special chars in request.form. Avoid ambiguous, and we will say avoid ambiguous in request.form. And then we're just going to create a new variable called password, and we will set that equal to generate password. And then here we're going to pass in length, use uppercase, use lowercase, use digits, use special chars, and then avoid ambiguous. Because even if it is not, if they haven't ticked it, then it will still be set to false. So then when it's passed in up here, then if this is false, then that won't run. And then at the bottom here, we just want to return JSONify password is equal to password. So now we have a way of actually generating a password. We need to come back to the index.html file, and we need to, two things. We want to, one, output the password on the page so that it's all done in the same page. So we'll create a div of ID of result. And then inside here, we'll just say if password, and then we'll say end if. And then inside this, we'll give a heading 2, and we will just say your generated password, and then we'll use a p tag, and we will output the password. So now we can style these two just to give them a little bit nicer viewing. And we will say heading 2, and we'll say color, and we'll make it green, so 4CAF50, and then we'll use a p tag, and we'll say background white, padding 10 pixels, border radius of 4 pixels, and a box shadow of 0, 2 pixels, 4 pixels. And then we'll do the same again, so RGBA 0000, and then 0.1 as the opacity. We'll say word break, and we'll say break all. We'll also say max width of 400 pixels and width of 100%, so that it matches the same length of the form. And then text align center. So now this is all styled up, we just need to actually handle the way that we can get to this generate and output it here. So at the bottom, we need to use a script tag, and we actually need to use 2, but the first one is going to link to jQuery. So we'll say https://code.jquery.com/jQuery version-3.6.0.min.js. So now that is done, we can actually use jQuery. So here, if we just come in and we say document.ready, and then we'll pass in a function, and then inside of this, we will say console log hello. So to make sure that this is working, we come back to here and inspect console log hello. Okay, so now what we can do is actually delete the document ready because we don't need it. We are going to use an event listener, but it's going to be on the form submit. So we will, inside the jQuery selector, use password form. We'll say on submit, and we'll pass in a function. And then inside of this, we will also pass in the event. So we can say event.preventDefault, and that will stop us from submitting the form and essentially being redirected to where the form points to. And currently it doesn't actually point to anywhere, but we'll say var form data is equal to new form data, and we'll just pass in this variable, and this will reference the form itself. And then we're going to use $.ajax, and then inside of here we will say URL, and we'll say generate. So this will actually, when this AJAX function is called, so once you've submitted the form, it will then take it through to this route and it will call this function. So generate, we'll say type post, and then we'll say data form data. So this is the variable that we've created here that references the form. We'll say process data, and we'll set that to false. And we'll also set the content type to false. Now we want to create a success. So we'll say function and pass back the data. So this is what is going to be passed back into this from the return statement. So this JSONify password is going to be this data. And we'll target the result. We'll say .html. And then here we'll say heading 2. And then we can actually create, or we can pass in what we have here. So essentially you don't actually need this. We could just take this out and just have the ID. And we'll say your generated password. And then use a p tag. And then inside of this, we will say data.password. And then we just need to handle the errors. So error, say function, and then we'll use JQXHR. And then we'll say text status and error thrown. And then here we'll say console.error. And we'll just say error, and then we'll pass in text status and error thrown. So now if we come back to Google Chrome and refresh, if we make this 16 and we just generate one, we have no characters selected because there isn't anything actually chosen, and currently we wouldn't be setting anything to true. So now if we change that to include uppercase letters, and we generate, we only get uppercase letters. And if we add digits, you can see digits have now been included. And if we choose avoid ambiguous characters, you'll realize that there are no zeros, no I's, no L's, no ones. And we'll also include all of them. And now we have a password which actually looks like it wouldn't be that crackable. Hopefully this has helped you grasp how we can use Python logic with JavaScript to create a one-page password generator that all happens in the front end. If you learned something today, please hit that like button and make sure you subscribe to see new videos coming. Thanks, and I'll see you again soon.